Very excited to be here with you today, and I think I've been set up very well by Rob and by Pat talking about the state of the pharmaceutical industry, the importance of social interaction, neuroplasticity. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about is the shifting the brain R&D paradigm from its core. So I've been in industry for over 20 years, developing therapeutic compounds like risperidone and others in CNS. And we have spoken in the industry for a very long time about the translational research gap. And we call it a gap, and we are very flippant about it and say, sort of mind the gap, there's a gap. And we don't realize that it's really more than a gap, it's a rut. It's a rut in how we think about how the whole system works. There are assumptions that we're making all the time in industry that really are fundamental here. We accept that discovery funding is largely funded by government. So we know that about $6 billion of funding is poured into discovery research at the one end of the gap. And we at the other end of the gap, we assume that the pharmaceutical industry is going to advance discoveries, and there's about $60 billion being invested there. But who funds the middle? And who ensures that we get from the discovery over to the other side of the gap? We believe that the academic community is advancing the science to a point where it can be reliably picked up by the industry, the industrial complex. We believe in hypothesis-driven science. And what that really means is a reductionistic approach, and we believe in that above a data-driven approach or a systems modeling approach in our core. And that manifests in so many different ways in how we think about the R&D process. We conduct R&D within a for-profit enterprise system, which then has repercussions for cost and pricing and return on investment. We believe that all data is good data. So these are ruts. These are ruts in our thinking. And that is why we're stuck where we're stuck and not advancing a next generation of therapeutics for brain disorders. So why does this matter? This matters because many veterans and many others with psychiatric and neurologic disorders are committing suicide at the rate of 20 a day. That means that by the time we leave here tomorrow, 40 more people will have died because of the current approach to the scientific R&D paradigm. We need to find solutions. We need to think outside this box. And our current approach is not working. And I can say that because 1 in 5 of us has a brain disorder. And so veterans are just the tip of the spear. And as you ask yourself, do we have cures for Alzheimer's disease? Do we have cures for schizophrenia? Do we have cures for autism? In over 2 decades, we have no cures for PTSD or traumatic brain injury, and that's the area that we focus our research. 0 in over 2 decades. That's our success, and that's actually the benchmark upon which we then judge everything we do. So at Cohen Veterans Bioscience, we're a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to fast-tracking diagnostics and therapeutics for these disorders. We started asking, well, how are we going to do this differently? What's got to change? We believe that the first thing that has to change is the approach. Instead of a reductionistic thinking, let's think about a systems approach and maybe bringing data-driven approaches, big data, to the computational space and starting to build predictive models, disease models. So a targeted approach, a reliably predictive approach. Think about weather prediction. Now, the first reaction is, yeah, we don't really predict the weather very well. But in fact, we do, right? We are able to identify when a storm is approaching and predict where it's going to go. And we do that fairly reliably. And it gets better and better the more data that we bring together, integrate into that computational model. And I believe that we can do the same thing for brain disorders. If we have the right kind of data and we can bring that data together, we can start building disease models that help us target therapies where they're going to have the largest effect size, and where we're going to be able to do that in a reliable and predictive way. And that's not the serendipitous, empirical way that we're doing the research today. But in order to do that, we need to think differently about how we actually organize ourselves as well. Translational science is not discovery science. Discovery science is largely an individual inventor type of approach. Translational science is team science. It means that we have to work together, we have to scale in a way that we haven't really done before. And what I'm talking about is things like doing genetics in post-traumatic stress disorders, which required over 200,000 samples to be collected and analyzed from over 60 organizations around the world in order for us to reach the first genome-wide significant findings. How do you orchestrate that type of thing to happen in the current way that we do science? So we have to rethink how we organize ourselves as well. But the technology is out there, right? We have finally, I think, we are at a pivot point for brain research where we're able to see inside the brain in ways that unprecedented ways. We can now use nanotechnologies and wearables and sensors to measure real-time, real-world phenomena. We can now use biomarkers and multi-arrays to look at DNA, RNA, metabolomics. We can look at brain imaging, and we can take mobile and social media data as well to understand their behavioral context, and we can take all of that information and bring it together and quantify brain health and start building these advanced computational models. But how do we do that? So our approach has been to build what I call the eBrain or virtual R&D company. What that means is we have less than 20 people in our organization, 20 people doing all of the sort of core work of orchestrating this eBrain model. But what we do is we work with leading organizations, and I don't care where they are. They can be for-profit organizations, they can be academic researchers, they can be nonprofit organizations. We have a top-down approach, and we identify what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, do our diligence to understand why we haven't been able to resolve it, find a way, think about a way of a solution for that, and then go find the best-in-class groups that are doing that and work with them exclusively to get it done. And we've done this by establishing a number of platforms, in this case, platforms for biomarker discovery, reliable biomarker discovery and validation, using high-performance assays that are tested blindly so we know that we're getting really good data, QC data. We are working with a wearables program, Early Signal, to measure how good are these devices? Do they really measure my sleep as accurately as they claim to? And how do we validate that? We're building a clinical trial network where we're taking innovative design, adaptive design models to test multiple compounds in a series using advanced biomarker analysis so that we can look at every individual and understand their profile. We're taking all of this data and we're building computational disease models, and then we're back translating them into animal models so that we have true construct validity and translational validity as we use animal models in the future to filter the next cycle of therapeutics. And all of this information and all of this data has to be accessible and shareable, and so we had to build a high-performance cloud commons data commons in partnership with the University of Chicago to organize all this information and to be able to bring the compute to the data, because the data is so large it can no longer move. This is what we call the e-brain model. And the important thing is reproducibility, robustness, and rigor have to be embedded at every step of the process. Every single step has to be QC'd, and we have to rethink how we're doing everything. And that's what we've spent the last 3 years doing, rethinking everything. But the advantage of this is that this type of system scales. This ecosystem model can accelerate discovery and development because we're not just relying on 20 people. We're relying on thousands of people. And all we're doing is helping organize the information, the knowledge transfer across different centers of excellence and knowledge. And so at the core of this, the Brain Commons helps us transfer that knowledge, but it's making sure that the information that's coming in is all high fidelity, and then taking that information and developing these predictive models on the back end. So the question is, does this work? Yes, I think it's starting to work. We have this year we started putting out the first publications, and you will hear from Amit Etkin later today about an initiative that we help fund. That's the first study up on the upper left on fMRI, resting state fMRI research, replicable, validated research. We have the first genome-wide significant hits for post-traumatic stress disorder. 200,000 individuals were sampled for that program. That data was brought in and analyzed under high QC performance. We launched an adaptive platform trial program with the Department of Defense. We've helped reform the VA's own clinical trial infrastructure. We've established CDISC standards, data standards for PTSD. We've built the Brain Commons and more. So it's possible to scale the science and create reproducible results. And it only took 3 years. So I would love to speak with people who are interested in working with us, partnering with us, and also innovating new ways of doing this and thinking about what else could we be doing. And I thank you for your attention.